Hey guys, welcome back to Ripe Stories. In this video, a crazy neighbor built a fence through my private back garden to steal my property. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one, aka the title story, starts like this. I became a caregiver about 2 years ago. My elderly father was balancing on a ladder cleaning the guttering and overdoing it as usual. This ordinary event went horribly wrong when he fell on his climb back down. He broke his leg, but luckily had no other serious injuries. What should have been an overnight visit to a hospital became a stay that extended into weeks after he contracted a serious illness. From that point on, I did everything for him. What else was I supposed to do? But this is not about pity or the issue I'm talking about today. After finally managing to get him home, he stayed in bed for days on end, which during his initial recovery was what the doctor had ordered. What wasn't good was that a year later, he still avoided exercise like a vampire in daylight, even refusing to leave his house. The few times I did see him active, I would find him in the garden. He might never climb a ladder again, but he still enjoyed his time outside. That all suddenly changed when our neighbor began putting their house up for sale, but we didn't think it would affect us much at the time. After 2 or 3 weeks of the sale being announced, the neighborhood was visited by swarms of parents and young couples, each led around by an eager salesman, and it did eventually sell. The other houses were split between nervousness and excitement at the idea of a new neighbor, hoping it would not be a smug Karen or a selfish thug. We got our answer when she arrived one day, followed by 2 large moving vans. Janet introduced herself in a soft voice with a thick, refined accent. "Oh, hello there. And you must be my new neighbors? How splendid. My name is Janet Bosbet. I do hope we can be friends. It would be nice to live somewhere with a bit of peace and quiet." She went on to explain that she was a widow and a retiree, so would be the only occupier most of the time, putting to rest any ideas of a noisy neighbor. I was very pleased, and Janet seemed nice, so I was looking forward to having my father to meet her at a later date when things quieted down. The moving vans came and went and then came back a second time. Each time they were seen hauling giant ornaments and pieces of furniture, all of which seemed to scream expensive. And even after that, she had even more visitors. The local gardeners and landscapers were talking with her, which I thought was very wise if she was not in a state to look after the garden herself at her age. I guess the conversation was a bigger deal than I first thought, because the next day they were back and had begun work on some changes in her back garden. I wanted to go over and be curious, but it didn't seem like the right time, so opted instead for the occasional snooping from a window or the garden itself. Due to good relations with the previous neighbor, we had previously kept quite a low and informal fencing between our properties, and this also helped with getting sunlight on our many plants. While I was not thrilled at the idea this might suddenly change, I did not want to rock the boat and sour a new friendship before it even began, so I decided to keep quiet and wait and see. My assumptions were finally realized when I saw a local delivery van arrive with stacks of tall wooden fencing, which they left in a pile in the back garden at the end of the day. I was preparing to go over and speak to her in person when I heard my father call out to me from the other room, finding him unresponsive on the kitchen floor after a bad fall. 20 minutes later, an ambulance arrived to take him to the hospital. I followed him over immediately, forgetting to grab my essential overnight bag. At the hospital, the doctors were unsure of his condition, so wanted to keep him in overnight. I agreed with their decision, and after popping home quickly for a few supplies, I returned and stayed there with him. The next morning my father was awake. He had no memory of the fall, but was given the all clear to return home, which was great news as I sorely needed a better nap in my own bed. I awoke to a cacophony of drilling and hammering, close enough that I initially thought I was having a nightmare of Bob the Builder. Jumping out of bed with a startle, I followed the noise to my window and drew back the curtains. I was shocked. Janet had indeed decided to put up a bigger fence, but instead of its original position, she had decided to move it to take up half of my own garden as well. Quickly throwing on some clothes, I stormed outside to take a closer look at the damages. Horrified, I stepped outside to find the workers casually taking a break on my lawn chairs. They did not seem at all surprised or embarrassed either. excuse me, this is my garden. I said, the only one not looking at their phone. He turned to me and pointed a thumb next door and said, "The lady said we could sit here." As I began to kick up more of a fuss, they eventually stirred and reluctantly went back to their vans, leaving crisp packets and soda cans where they sat. At this point I was in a very sour mood and was not looking forward to the upcoming argument with Janet. I knocked twice before I heard a response, as if she had heard me and was expecting my appearance already. Janet opened the door and invited me inside, showing me into a newly decorated kitchen area before pausing to let me speak. Controlling my temper, I decided to first see if it was an accident. "Janet, I think the workers have made a mistake with the fence." Puzzled, she looked from me to her garden. "How so, dear?" My stomach sank. This was going to become a real hassle if she had actually meant to cut my garden in half. "Well, it's not where the fence should be. It's now taking up room in my own garden," I replied. She made an odd frown and then her eyes lit up. "Oh yes, the former homeowner said it could be moved a bit, but she didn't have the time to do it herself. You don't mind, do you? You said your father doesn't get out much anymore, if I've got that right." I stood silent, jaw feeling like it had hit the floor. I absolutely do mind, and so would my father. "We need our garden back to how it was. The fence needs to move," I replied, half shouting it out in growing frustration. Janet after that seemed to grow frostier. If she was at all sympathetic, she just didn't show it. "As I see it, your garden is now the size it should be. Shame on you really for taking advantage of an old lady in the first place," she tutted loudly in disapproval. Despite protests, she refused to back down, somehow convinced that I originally stole land from her and the former neighbor. I left the room and stormed back across the driveway, pissed off that my nice garden had been reduced to a small shaded square of grass, like an enclosed prison yard. The next few days passed in bitter silence. I stared out at the fence in contempt while at the same time Janet was hosting a garden party for the neighborhood, my own invite somehow lost in the mail. As bad as this all was, my father had still yet to notice the changes to his garden, and as much as I dreaded it, I knew I needed to tell him. He didn't believe me at first, he insisted on seeing it for himself, and he was too stubborn to be dissuaded. Upon entering what was left of the garden, my father began to sob, his favorite place savagely reduced to a shadow of its former self. The few plants that had remained on our side of the fence now began to wither from the absence of direct sunlight. It was a sad sight to see. I had never seen my father cry before. I was now ready to get back our garden at any cost. Under the cover of the night, I crept back outside and began to dismantle the fence panels. It went well, and I was surprisingly pleased with myself after the little bit of vigilantism. I woke next morning after a long and restful night's rest to find the fence was intact again. Shocked, I went outside to investigate to find it had been quickly repaired and CCTV cameras were now installed along its perimeter, pointing in all directions. I left the matter a few days for the dust to settle before I tried plan B. I was not positive that Janet knew it was me, but in hindsight it was not exactly the perfect crime either. It was a bit embarrassing to admit how easily my temper could sway me sometimes. No matter though, that fence had to go one way or another, so the other plan, be nice and back, was now ready to go. I strolled across the driveway, fresh cupcakes in hand, and a painfully forced smile stretched clear across my face. This time, when Janet opened the door, her face clearly displayed disinterest, further shown when she stayed at the door rather than inviting me in. After a moment's pause, "I'm so sorry about the other day. That fence was just such a shock, you know. I made this as a way of apology. I hope you liked them," I said as I handed over the cupcakes. She eyed them suspiciously, but did seem to smile a bit. "Oh, thank you. They do look scrumptious. If that's all," she said as she stepped back to close the door. I quickly intervened. "Wait, I just wanted to ask something if you don't mind." Janet reluctantly sighed and let me continue. "Well, you said the neighbor before told you about the land, right? Did—" Anger flashed across her face as Janet told me to wait here before heading inside. She returned some moments later, carrying something. Janet shoved a slip of paper into my hand, saying, "Here, a copy of the deed. This should tell you all you need to know. Now please let me be." As she slammed the door on me, plan B was an utter failure, and she even kept the cupcakes. Looking over the deed later, it looked like she was right. Her garden was supposed to be much bigger. But why? That got me thinking, and so when I dug out my own deed a few hours later, I was surprised to find it immensely different. This obviously smelled of foul play. Had she altered her own deed to grab at our land? If she wants a fight, she can have it. Begin plan C. court. I consulted my family lawyer and put together a lawsuit on the grounds of property fraud, aka falsifying the deed, property damage to my garden, and emotional damage, gaslighting me for stealing the land in the first place. She met me in court with the best legal team money could buy, but even then, they could not beat real evidence. After a drawn-out and expensive court battle, a verdict was finally reached. The judge was fully in my favor, but after some leniency talks we reached another deal. Janet was ordered to pay the total sum of 56,000 British pounds to me, as well as move the fence back according to the original deed. If she were a little younger or poorer, she might have seen prison time for the fraud, so she really got off lightly here, not that she ever felt that way though. I guess you could say that we haven't really become friends since then, but we know to stay out of each other's way. And yeah guys, that is clearly true love between neighbors. Who would need enemies if you have neighbors like this Karen? Either way, the next one is a fantastic malicious compliance story that you don't want to miss. I, now 45 male, used to be a military driver in the Dutch Navy a long time ago, and at some point I was stationed at a little Navy base meant for physical rehabilitation of Navy personnel. With little, I mean a base with less than a few hundred people. My function was to drive patients to the military hospital, CMH, to drive groups of people to the swimming pool, etc, etc. When I was at home on the weekends, I would do my workout at my regular gym, but on workdays when finished with my work, I would train in a small gym on site where I was stationed because I would stay on base during the week. I was about 21 years old and I was preparing for my very first bodybuilding contest, so I was muscular and working out a lot. At some point, the gym manager, a Marine sergeant, told me that somebody at upper management was offended by my looks and that I was no longer allowed to wear a tank top during my workout. My tank top was wide-fitting and purely functional, and seemingly nobody was ever bothered by me wearing it, at least that's what I thought. I argued with him about how unfair I thought it was and pointed towards a fellow gym goer who was also wearing a tank top and asked the sergeant why this guy was not told to not wear a tank top during his workout. This man was athletic and in a fair shape, but not bulky and muscular. The sergeant, I got along with him very well, agreed with me but told me that the officers in charge ordered him to tell just me, and orders are orders. He agreed with me though, but higher-ups already decided, so he felt that he didn't have a choice. At that point, I just took my loss and finished my workout. The next day, I found the perfect solution and took one of the shirts we got in our Dutch PSU, something I cannot read what roughly translates to personal standardized gear. This shirt was a stretchy, slim-fitted white shirt, so I decided to wear that for my next workout. When I arrived to the gym, the sergeant shook his head and told me that this was not what the officers in charge would appreciate, so I told him this was what the Navy gave me, so it cannot be wrong. My body was much more on display compared to the tank top. The tight fit showed everything, especially when I was sweating. I was fully compliant with the dress code and nobody would be able to dispute that. The sergeant laughed because he knew I was right, but told me the officers probably would be pissed. I just kept doing my workout like this during that week, and after the weekend the sergeant told me with a smile that higher-ups retracted their order and to please start wearing my tank top again. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. I know this title seems wild, but trust me when I say that there was no way I could downplay what happened last week. So my son uses a wheelchair, and he has since the moment that we couldn't carry him anymore. He was born with a deformed pelvis, which means he cannot work, and to date there's no surgery or medication that could fix this. He does not even really mind, since he is used to the wheelchair since forever. There's not really much that he misses, you know? He is also much more into video games and physics than he is into sports or things like that, and also he doesn't fantasize about doing these things that he cannot do. He is 11, 12 next month, and this whole fiasco only happened a week ago. I just feel I should really get it off my chest. Besides, my son also likes reading these stories and said I should share what happened. So it all started on a Saturday morning in a supermarket. Me and my son were simply going shopping to stock up on some bits for the house. We usually go in the morning when it's less busy and chaotic in and around the shop. My son was looking at something down the aisle to where I was. I could still see him, but I guess it wouldn't be obvious to strangers that we came together. That is when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a woman and a boy approach him. She looked sweet, so I did not think that I would have to go over, but it was what she said that started it all off. "Do you think my son could have a turn now?" she asked, smiling down at my son. "What? Turn on what?" "Oh, sorry, I've been at this aisle for quite a while, right?" my son replied, scooting away from where he was browsing, assuming that that's what she wanted. She laughed and rolled her eyes. "Of course not, you idiot. Let him have a turn on your chair." After hearing this, I began storming over. "What did you just call my son?" "Nothing, sir. Let's go, Jeremy," the Karen replied with a sweet smile, leading her son, who looked a few years older than mine, away from us. "Mom, you just said I could have a turn," Jeremy wailed, tugging on his mom's arm. "Oh, don't worry, you will," I heard the woman whisper, barely audible. I was slightly shaken up and wanted to leave, but my son insisted on staying. His argument being that he had not finished browsing the magazines and that he needed to get tough for the real world. Sometimes his young wiseness shocks me deeply. So we stayed. I was on edge for the next 20 minutes, not staying too far away from my son, worried the woman would come back and do something stupid. "Oh, hey again," I heard from behind me, and there she was. "Hello," I replied tight-lipped. "No need to seem so emotionless. I'm just coming to ask again if Jeremy here can have a ride on your son's wheelchair. He's been using it since he came in. Surely it would be my son's turn now." "Are you serious? Do you know what a wheelchair is and why people have them?" I responded with a laugh. I just couldn't believe it. "Dude, he'll be fine," Jeremy remarked. "My son cannot walk," I said slowly, assuming the clocks would tick and they would walk away in embarrassment. However, they did not. "Okay. Prop him up against a wall or something, or let him sit on the floor. It's not fair that your son gets to sit down the whole time he is shopping and my son cannot." The woman crossed her arms and glared at me. "Are you trying to say having a wheelchair is an advantage or something? It's not like he's choosing to need it, and also if it's that much of an issue to you, just go and buy one and that way Jeremy here can play pretend all he wants." "Play pretend? My son's feet are sore from walking." The woman began raising her voice. "Okay, that's awesome. Did you come by car?" my son asked. "Yes, what is it to you?" Jeremy replied. "Then go and sit in the car to rest your feet." My son, bless him, was not trying to sound confrontational. I do believe he was trying to find a solution for them. "How dare you be so rude?" the woman shouted, eyes bulging from her head. "Just because you have a disability, you think you can say what you want and everyone will allow it because of your circumstances. Well, not me. I think you're a horrible, selfish little boy and need to be taught a good lesson." I replied, "You cannot talk to my son like that. I don't know who you think you are, but you're not entitled, and neither is your son, to the wheelchair my son uses and needs, in case you forgot that detail. I can talk to you however I want. This is America and we have free speech. Besides, I really don't think your son needs it that much, and you probably got it through taxpayers' money anyway." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "First of all, no we didn't. I'm sure you know how shoddy the healthcare system is. We had to pay out of pocket for this. And by the way, it was not cheap, so it's not to be treated like a toy," I remarked, standing between her and my son, who had rolled a little further away. "Okay, we will see," the Karen replied with a smirk towards her son, who smirked back. I really did not have a good feeling about this. They walked off and I decided that it was time to leave. My son resisted slightly, but I was not having it. I knew they were up to something, and I did not want my son to have to go through anything. We quickly went to the tills and paid for what we had. We happened to be being served by the manager of the branch, so I told her about what happened. She apologized and said that they have cameras with speech detection, and in such a quiet time, what they said probably picked up. So I gave her my email and she said she would send me the footage in case I needed to go further with a report or anything like that. We thanked her and began leaving. "Wait, Dad, I forgot to pick up that magazine I was looking at. It will be quick, I promise," my son said. "Okay, fine, we're gonna be quick though," I replied, and we began walking back to the right aisle. I was slightly tense that something might happen, and then it did. "Get him!" I heard yell from behind, and the woman rushed forward and grabbed the back wheels of my son's wheelchair, pulling it backwards so he fell out and onto the floor, crashing down with a sickening thud. "What is wrong with you?" I yelled in anger at the woman, who was laughing. I stood, and before I could do anything, she hit me over the head. She quickly ran off with the wheelchair before her son jumped in it and started rolling around, all the while laughing. His mom then shimmied him away and along a different aisle. I stayed to take care of my son, who had a badly bleeding nose and was beginning to cry. "We saw! Security is on it!" I heard someone speak and looked up to see the manager and a few other employees rush over to help. One of them was carrying a first aid kit and was helping clean up my kit, another handed him a donut, which very quickly made my son forget that he was injured. A few minutes later, we heard yelling throughout the otherwise silent store. "Get off me! Mom, help!" "Excuse me, get your filthy hands off my son. Are you trying to remove him from his wheelchair? That's a hate crime." There were multiple other remarks, and then I heard someone throw a punch, and then security called the cops. The son and mother attempted to make a dash for the door, but at that point I ran over, and with all the anger left in me, I knocked her out cold. Her son did not dare to continue his fleeing attempt, and the cops arrived soon after. The manager had gone off and got the laptop with the CCTV footage on it, showing it to the cops, who agreed immediately to take the pair away. My son, of course, got his wheelchair back, and I pressed charges. Sometime later we found out that Karen ended up behind bars for a substantial amount of time. We don't know what happened to the son, he is a minor, so they could not disclose anything. But we also filed a restraining order against a woman. When she is out of jail, we don't want anything to do with her in the future. And the last one is an interesting story from r/petty revenge. It is titled, "Some kid in the mall mocked me, so I mocked him back." And this, I gotta say, is a true petty revenge story. So for context, I'm 16. I went to the mall with my family to get some groceries. You know, typical stuff. When we were checking out, there was a kid, I don't know where their parents went, making faces at me, mocking my glasses and bracelet, but I ignored it. A short moment passed and I saw the same kid again, begging his mom to buy him ice cream. I overheard their conversation. Mom, can I have some ice cream? The chocolate one with a lot of sprinkles," the kid asked. "It's almost dinner time, we will get it next time," the mom said reasonably. Well, at that moment, I let the intrusive thoughts win and went for it. I walked up to the shop, ordered the most delicious looking ice cream, a vanilla cone dipped in chocolate and covered in sprinkles, and then strolled past the kid, eating it as deliciously as possible. I looked down at him mockingly. I'm like 180 centimeters tall. That sounds like a Reddit moment. Feeling victorious. Moments later, the kid started crying and throwing a tantrum as I walked away towards the parking lot. I could still hear him crying and screaming in the distance. Legends say that the kid is still crying to this day. And yeah guys, please check out my Spotify in the description, and I will see you again tomorrow.